The run up to this verdict, the big question was what number is going to be big enough to make Donald Trump stop? $83.3 million. What does that mean for his future actions? And what does it mean more specifically as it forces his hand on liquidity?
I think to answer your first question, Alicia, and good morning, and thanks for having me on the weekend. I'm very excited to be on the show. I think what it means to your first question, Alicia, it's left to be seen, right? I mean, we do know that Donald Trump posted on Truth Social almost immediately after the verdict was rendered in this case. He did not mention E. Jean Carroll by name at all. He did not include what he normally did in terms of defamation of E. Jean Carroll. Of course, he claims he's going to appeal. That's a whole other cup of tea. And I think Chuck would agree with me that there are no valid grounds for an appeal in this case. But I think what's left to be seen is whether or not $83.3 million is enough to keep him quiet. Should he redirect his vitriol to somebody else, it will only result in more defamation lawsuits. I don't think he can control himself. And I think that's something that we've seen time and time again. And just like a broken record, which is Donald Trump, I think his history of legal losses is going to continue for him. And his best hits are left to be seen, I think.
You know, what really struck me, everyone, by this was in court, E. Jean Carroll's lawyer noted that she came forward because she felt it was finally time to speak about what, and then pointed to Donald Trump, he had done to her, and that she gave interviews because she had to defend herself when he attacked her, and that she brought the lawsuit to try to get him to stop. Chuck, this was about E. Jean Carroll, but it was also about accountability and the fact that powerful people don't just get to do whatever they want. And Donald Trump has bucked the law at every sense, just in terms of this case. And the lawyers made the case in court that what needs to be done for him to respect the rule of law.
Well, maybe this is a first step. I mean, you know, the verdict was large, over $80 million, but the biggest component of that, Simone, was punitive damages, right? The jury obviously felt, and unanimously so, that his conduct was both outrageous and needed to be stopped. Now, we'll see if it works. We don't know that yet. But that, I think, is a very clear signal that the law applies to him, and at least this jury in this case felt that he had not only harmed Ms. Carroll, but he ought to be punished for harming Ms. Carroll.
One of the things I found very fascinating as we looked at the professionals in the room, you know, E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, and those who were laying out the case, the judge, the jury. And then there was Alina Habba. I'd like to play her response to this verdict, if we could, just get a flavor and a feel for how Ms. Habba saw the case that she had just tried.
No. I'm glad you asked me that question. No, I'm not having any second thoughts about representing President Trump. It is the proudest thing I could ever do.
It's the proudest thing I could ever do. But I recall a comment that she made at one point where she was asked, would you rather be pretty or smart? And her response was, I'd rather be pretty because I can fake being smart. The reality of it is you need to be smart in a courtroom. You need to understand. And her reaction a lot of times, Chuck, went to the drama. It was performative. It was to appease Trump. It was not to deal with the facts that were at hand. First off, this was not a case where you were, trying to prevent him from being judged a sexual predator. That had already taken place. This was about something very different. She seemed to be out of sorts with what her mission was, and actually wound up costing her client, I think, an incredible amount of money.
Yeah, I think performative, Michael, is a good word. I mean, federal court is a very staid, serious, formal place, right? It's rules and procedure. Performative doesn't tend to work. It doesn't work.
Right.
And it's even more clear that it doesn't work when you don't have any really good facts at your disposal. And so perhaps a lawyer, I don't know this particular one, has nothing left to do but sort of make a lot
do the drama,
make a lot of noise. In the end of the day, though, the facts control, as you know, right? Wasn't it Shakespeare who had Cassius tell Brutus, the fault lies not in our stars but in ourselves?
That's it. That's true. That's true. And so I guess extension of the question then is, how does a jury look at that when they're looking at the weight of the matter in front of them, and they're deciding how much skin Donald Trump is going to have to pay in this, and how much he's going to put on the table? How does a jury look at the lawyers and look at the process, how Trump himself behaved? Do you think any of that drove some of the ultimate? Because actually, I thought the number would be higher. Personally, I thought the number would have been higher just based on the way Trump, behaved during various points in the case.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I thought it would be higher or lower. I thought it was high as it turned out, Michael. But I think I'd say it this way. Lawyers like to think that what they say in court matters a lot, and it matters some. But again, what really truly matters in a court of law is the law and the facts. And it doesn't matter how good you are. Maybe on television, great lawyers win cases, but in courtrooms, great facts win cases. And here, it was very clear. Mr. Trump had defamed this poor woman. He had sexually assaulted this woman. And so those facts, adduced in a court of law with a good judge presiding, results in a verdict for Ms. Carroll, as it should. I don't know that Alina Habba or anyone else could have sort of worked a miracle in Mr. Trump's favor, given that set of facts.
Well, Katie, the question I have is E. Jean Carroll ever going to see this money? $83.3 million is a lot of money, but, I mean, we could put it on the screen. New York Times has an article that notes Trump will be able to wait to pay the full $83.3 million until all appeals are exhausted. How is this going to work?
Yeah, so we've already seen this happen in the first defamation trial with E. Jean Carroll. Donald Trump, whether he was able to get a surety company to be able to facilitate him posting the bond, actually ended up posting the entirety of the bond in the amount of $5.6 million by way of stipulation, by way of agreement with E. Jean Carroll's lawyers that was deposited into the court where it sits. The additional money on top of the $5 million verdict was to cover interest as the case winds its way through the appellate process. In this instance, when this case involves this level of punitive damages, the local rules in the Southern District of New York talk about the bond's amount. It depends on the company. The bond company may require Donald Trump to post anywhere from 20%, if not more, also with collateral. So what could he use for collateral, Simone? He could use real estate properties. He could maybe find somebody else who could be serving as collateral in this instance. But the problem for Donald Trump is leverage. He's over-leveraging himself. And that's what got him into trouble in the first place with the New York Attorney General's case for the civil fraud. The fact that he overinflated the value of his assets, and now the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, is seeking disgorgement of upwards of $370 million. Donald Trump over-leverages himself in every way possible. He over-leverages himself when it comes to money. He does it when it comes to his reputation. He does it when it comes to his brand. He does it when it comes to his political stability and his political viability. And the cards and this house of cards comes crashing down eventually. When it comes to money, though, that is singularly the thing that brings him the most pride. And so when he keeps on taking hit after hit on his pocketbook, that's when it matters the most for somebody like Donald Trump. And it also has to matter to the donors. We know that people are ponying up money, maybe $5, maybe more, every month to be able to give. But where is this money going? He's lighting it on fire. He lights it on fire when he does what he does, which is he doesn't follow the law. He lights it on fire when he doesn't listen to his lawyers, but he also has it lit on fire when his lawyers are as bad as Alina Habba. And we don't know whether she counseled him not to speak or not to act the way that he did. But from what I've learned off the record, even Judge Kaplan was appalled visibly at the behavior that he saw from Alina Kaplan and from Donald Trump. The jurors, they see everything, guys. When you're in a jury trial, and Chuck knows this, when you're in a jury trial and you're a trial lawyer, the jury is looking at everything. They're looking at your shoes. Like, did Michael polish his shoes today? They're looking at Simone. Does Simone wear that pretty necklace today? They're looking at everything, right? And so they're watching all of this go down. They're looking at the judge. They're looking at the transactions between the judge, the exchanges between the judge. You see, like, the paradigms of integrity on the side of E. Jean Carroll, and you see the depravity of the law that's going on Donald Trump's side. And so, of course, the jurors are going to be like, yeah, that's not right. That's not good, especially the petulant toddler running out of the courtroom when he's pissed off or he's mad, excuse me. And so because of that, that's the reason why you saw your punitive damages yesterday at $65 million.
This was, Chuck, about minimizing the damage that Donald Trump can do. It is telling to me that Judge Kaplan advised jurors in this case to, quote, never disclose that you were on this story. Just how unusual is that?
It is unusual. Most juries are not anonymous. It's also a sad sign of our times because we know that people who serve in public roles as jurors or as election workers, Alicia, get threatened, right? Get harassed, get stalked. So I think his advice is sound. It's also sad. It is unusual.
I guess, Katie, my last question for you surrounds all of this has happened, right? The jury made their decision. It struck me that the jury did send a question to the judge asking, how high can the numbers go, which was telling to me. It's my understanding that Donald Trump did a deposition where he noted that he was worth like upwards of $400 million or something like that. So that this $83.3 million, given what he said he has, pardon me, not that he's worth, that he had $400 million in his bank account. Given that he says he has $400 million in his bank account, I've seen some experts note that $83.3 million isn't that much money for him, and this number is important because if he tries to appeal, did he perjure himself when he said he had $400 million in his bank account? So how does this, is that right? Are these experts keying in on something that kind of mutes a strategy for Trump?
Well, there's that saying, right, Simone, the numbers don't lie. Because they don't. They are what they are. And that's kind of what got Donald Trump into trouble with the New York Attorney General's office. But to your question, Donald Trump has said that he has $400 million in liquid cash to be able to access. That doesn't include the totality of his assets, which is a real estate portfolio and other investments that he has. But it's the cumulative effect of whether or not it's enough to make a ding in his net worth. And I think your net worth, especially for somebody like Donald Trump, isn't just cash on hand. Your net worth also includes whether or not people think that you're a risk worth taking. So putting aside what his success is with the New York AG's case and whether he's able to survive what they've called the corporate death penalty to be able to continue to do business in the state of New York, is Donald Trump a worthwhile risk if you are a person in the world of finance and business? Is the kind of person that you think is going to be worth taking a gamble on, to loan money to be able to invest with, to be able to continue to maybe make a profit with? We've seen him file bankruptcies. We've seen him fail miserably as a businessman. So despite his attestations or his protestations that he's worth a lot of money and that his brand is invaluable and that he's, quote, the richest man in the world because of that brand, the reality comes crashing down for him because it's not. So if you can't even get somebody to loan you, in terms of being a bond surety, $5 million, who's going to pony up this now for him? Somebody will, but he's going to have to put collateral up, and he runs the risk of losing that.